Welcome to Celestial Zodiac. Today we're diving deep into one of the most powerful and often misunderstood cycles in astrology, Mars retrograde. If you've ever felt unusually drained, unmotivated, easily irritated, or frustrated by stalled progress, chances are Mars was retrograde at the time. This is often when efforts feel blocked, conflicts simmer beneath the surface, and actions that once felt easy suddenly require far more energy. But Mars retrograde isn't here to weaken us or stop us entirely. It has a deeper purpose, one that calls for recalibration, conscious action, and a redefinition of how we use our force. Astronomically, Mars retrograde is an optical illusion. From Earth's perspective, Mars appears to move backward in the sky due to the difference in orbital speeds between Earth and Mars, particularly when Earth overtakes Mars in its orbit. Astrologically, this apparent reversal symbolizes a turning inward of drive and desire. Forward momentum slows, not to punish us but to redirect energy toward awareness. Mars governs action, motivation, ambition, physical energy, and survival instincts. It rules how we assert ourselves, how we pursue goals, how we express anger, and how we respond when our boundaries are challenged. Mars also governs courage, initiative, competition, sexuality, and the raw will to act. When Mars turns retrograde, these themes don't disappear, they internalize. Instead of pushing outward, energy turns inward, revealing unresolved anger, suppressed desires, misdirected effort, or burnout that has gone unnoticed. Mars retrograde asks us to examine why we act, not just how. It challenges impulsive behavior, forces confrontation with frustration, and invites a more intentional relationship with power, effort, and personal drive. Beyond ambition and raw drive, Mars governs how we use energy in the physical and emotional body. It rules initiative, effort, stamina, and the way we move toward what we want. Mars governs instinctive reactions, fight or flight responses, and the survival mechanisms that activate under pressure. It also rules anger, desire, sexuality, and the assertion of boundaries, how we defend ourselves, pursue goals, and respond to conflict. Mars governs physical momentum and exertion. Workouts, competitive effort, productivity, and the ability to push through resistance. It rules courage and risk-taking, but also impatience, impulsivity, and aggression when energy is misdirected. In everyday life, Mars shows up in how we handle frustration, how quickly we react, and whether our actions are driven by purpose or by impulse. When Mars goes retrograde, these systems don't shut down at random. They slow, misfire, or turn inward because energy is being reassessed rather than discharged. Motivation dips. Effort feels heavier. Anger simmers instead of exploding. Actions require more intention, and impulsive moves often backfire. Old conflicts resurface because unresolved anger or misaligned desires are demanding attention. Mars retrograde isn't here to weaken willpower. It's here to expose how we use energy, where we waste it, and why certain efforts no longer move us forward. Rather than pushing harder, Mars retrograde asks for strategic restraint. It reveals burnout, misdirected ambition, and patterns of overexertion. By slowing external action, it creates space to realign effort with authenticity, teaching us that true strength isn't constant motion. It's conscious, purposeful action. During Mars retrograde, energy becomes internalized rather than outwardly forceful. This is why motivation can feel inconsistent, progress slows, and actions that once felt straightforward suddenly meet resistance. The universe isn't saying don't act, it's saying act with awareness. This is a cycle meant for reassessing how effort is applied, where energy is being drained, and whether action is coming from intention or impulse. Mars retrograde is not ideal for launching aggressive new initiatives, but it is powerful for recalibrating goals, refining strategies, and rebuilding strength in a more sustainable way. Mars retrograde also has a way of pulling unresolved anger and unfinished conflicts back into awareness. Old frustrations resurface, buried resentments demand acknowledgement, and power struggles from the past may re-emerge for resolution. This happens because Mars rules instinctive reactions and emotional responses tied to survival and self-defense. What hasn't been confronted or consciously processed often returns during Mars retrograde, not to provoke chaos, but to offer a chance for healthier expression and closure. Rather than pushing against obstacles, Mars retrograde teaches patience with process. It asks us to slow reactive behavior, examine where we've been forcing outcomes, and reconnect with desire that is authentic rather than performative. When handled consciously, this cycle strengthens self-control, refines boundaries, and transforms raw aggression into focused, intentional power. Emotionally and psychologically, Mars retrograde can feel frustrating in ways that are subtle at first and then increasingly pronounced. Energy no longer moves cleanly outward. It compresses. Motivation comes in waves. Drive stalls, then surges, then stalls again. You may feel restless without knowing where to direct that restlessness. Actions that once felt instinctive suddenly require conscious effort. This isn't weakness. It's awareness emerging through resistance. During Mars retrograde, internal pressure builds. Anger doesn't always erupt immediately. Instead, it simmers. Emotional reactions may feel delayed, intensified, or strangely out of sync with the present moment. You may find yourself revisiting old conflicts, replaying moments where boundaries were crossed, or questioning whether your efforts are actually aligned with what you want. This isn't a failure of will. It's a recalibration of desire and self-direction. Mars retrograde activates the body as much as the psyche. People often become more aware of physical tension, fatigue, or irritation, especially when emotions have been suppressed or ignored. The nervous system becomes more reactive not because something is wrong, but because unexpressed energy is asking to be acknowledged. This heightened awareness can feel uncomfortable, particularly for those who rely on constant movement or productivity to regulate emotions. Mars retrograde interrupts that pattern and asks for conscious embodiment instead of automatic action. Psychologically, Mars retrograde exposes instinctual patterns, habitual ways of reacting to challenge, conflict, and pressure. You may notice repeated emotional triggers, recurring frustrations, or disproportionate reactions that seem to come from nowhere. These moments aren't random. They reveal unresolved anger, unclaimed desire, or survival responses that were formed long ago and never consciously examined. Mars retrograde brings these patterns back into awareness so they can be understood rather than reenacted. Emotionally, this period can intensify sensitivity around autonomy, respect, and personal boundaries. People may feel easily provoked or defensive, especially when their efforts go unrecognized or their space feels invaded. At the same time, this sensitivity creates an opportunity for emotional honesty. Mars retrograde favors restraint over reaction, awareness over confrontation, and intentional action over impulsive behavior. When frustration rises, it often signals a deeper need for self-respect, rest, or redirection rather than immediate conflict. On a deeper level, Mars retrograde can temporarily disrupt our sense of control over momentum. We're used to measuring progress by action and output, but during this cycle, effort alone doesn't guarantee movement. Inner alignment becomes just as important as external force. This shift can feel destabilizing at first, but it ultimately refines personal power. Mars retrograde strips away performative strength and reveals authentic will, teaching us that true power doesn't come from constant exertion. It comes from conscious, aligned action. Now, how Mars retrograde manifests depends heavily on the zodiac sign it occurs in, because each sign filters Mars energy, drive, anger, motivation, and desire, in a very different way. When Mars retrogrades in Aries, its home sign, raw energy turns inward. Frustration can build quickly, impatience rises, and the urge to act clashes with repeated obstacles. Anger may simmer rather than explode, creating internal pressure. This retrograde asks for conscious self-control, strategic pacing, and a redefinition of strength that isn't based on constant action. In Taurus, Mars retrograde slows physical momentum and challenges motivation around stability, money, and comfort. Effort can feel heavy and resistance to change intensifies. This is a time to reassess whether energy is being spent protecting comfort at the expense of growth, and to learn how to move steadily rather than forcefully. When Mars retrogrades in Gemini, mental agitation replaces direct action. Energy scatters, frustration comes from indecision, and arguments may revolve around words rather than actions. This retrograde emphasizes intentional communication, thoughtful responses, and aligning mental effort with purposeful direction instead of reactive debate. In Cancer, Mars retrograde turns anger inward and emotional reactions become more pronounced. Old wounds resurface, defensiveness increases, and family or home-related conflicts may reappear. This is a powerful time to examine emotional triggers and learn how to assert boundaries without retreating or lashing out. When Mars retrogrades in Leo, issues around pride, recognition, and personal power come into focus. Motivation may dip when validation isn't immediate, and frustration can arise around feeling unseen or unappreciated. This retrograde asks for a deeper understanding of authentic confidence versus ego-driven action. In Virgo, Mars retrograde redirects energy towards self-criticism and overanalysis. Effort can feel exhausting when perfection becomes the goal. Frustration often stems from feeling inefficient or unproductive. This cycle encourages refining systems, pacing energy, and releasing the belief that worth is tied to constant output. When Mars retrogrades in Libra, conflict avoidance becomes a central theme. Anger may be suppressed in the name of harmony, leading to passive-aggressive dynamics or internal resentment. Relationship tensions resurface, asking for honest confrontation, balanced boundaries, and courage in asserting needs. In Scorpio, Mars retrograde intensifies internal power struggles. Control issues, jealousy, and unresolved anger come to the surface. This is a deeply transformative retrograde that exposes where power has been misused or withheld. When handled consciously, it offers profound emotional release and renewed inner strength. When Mars retrogrades in Sagittarius, motivation around goals, beliefs, and direction comes into question. Energy may feel unfocused, and frustration arises when enthusiasm fades. This retrograde challenges blind confidence and asks for reflection on whether actions align with true values rather than borrowed ideals. In Capricorn, Mars retrograde tests endurance, ambition, and authority. Effort may feel blocked in career matters, and frustration can build around responsibility and long-term goals. This cycle encourages redefining success, reassessing ambition, and learning when persistence becomes self-exhaustion. When Mars retrogrades in Aquarius, frustration centers around freedom, individuality, and collective dynamics. Energy may feel disrupted by group conflicts or social tension. This retrograde asks for reassessment of where rebellion is productive and where cooperation requires conscious effort. In Pisces, Mars retrograde dissolves clear direction. Energy becomes diffuse, motivation fluctuates, and anger may be absorbed rather than expressed. This cycle heightens sensitivity and intuition, teaching that not all action is physical. Some of the most powerful shifts happen through emotional awareness and spiritual alignment. Before we look at how Mars retrograde moves through the 12 houses, it's important to understand what the houses represent in astrology. While zodiac signs describe personality traits and energetic expression, the houses describe areas of life, the environments, challenges, and experiences where planetary energy plays out. When Mars retrogrades through a particular house, that area of life becomes the focal point for reviewing effort, motivation, boundaries, and how energy is being applied. This is where action slows, frustration surfaces, and awareness deepens through lived experience rather than force. When Mars retrogrades in the first house, energy turns inward toward identity, physical presence, and personal drive. You may feel less motivated to push forward or notice frustration around how you assert yourself. This is a period of reassessing how you use personal power rather than forcing self-reinvention. In the second house, Mars retrograde highlights money, resources, and self-worth. Motivation around earning or financial security may stall, prompting a deeper look at how effort connects to value. Psychologically, this retrograde asks whether your drive is rooted in fear of loss or genuine self-confidence. When Mars retrogrades in the third house, frustration centers around communication, mental effort, and daily interactions. Arguments may simmer beneath the surface, and impatience with routines, siblings, or co-workers can increase. This is a time to slow reactive responses and become more conscious of how words are used as weapons or tools. In the fourth house, Mars retrograde draws energy inward toward home, family, and emotional foundations. Old conflicts tied to family dynamics or childhood experiences may resurface. Emotionally, this retrograde asks you to examine where anger has been suppressed and how emotional safety affects your ability to act in the world. When Mars retrogrades in the fifth house, creative drive, romance, and pleasure require reevaluation. Motivation to express yourself may fluctuate, and old desires or passions can reappear for reassessment. This period emphasizes authentic joy and desire rather than ego-driven validation. In the sixth house, Mars retrograde affects work habits, daily routines, and physical health. Energy levels may dip, and pushing too hard can lead to burnout. Psychologically, this retrograde highlights the connection between overexertion, stress, and the body's need for sustainable pacing. When Mars retrogrades in the seventh house, conflict dynamics in relationships come under review. Anger may be projected onto others or suppressed to keep the peace. This retrograde asks for honest confrontation, balanced boundaries, and a clearer understanding of how power operates within partnerships. In the eighth house, Mars retrograde intensifies internal power struggles around intimacy, shared resources, and emotional vulnerability. Old resentments, control issues, or unresolved anger may surface. This is a deeply transformative period that encourages conscious engagement with emotional intensity rather than avoidance. When Mars retrogrades in the ninth house, motivation around beliefs, direction, and long-term goals comes into question. Energy may feel scattered or unfocused, especially around education, travel, or personal philosophy. This retrograde challenges blind conviction and asks for alignment between actions and true values. In the 10th house, Mars retrograde tests ambition, authority, and career momentum. Professional efforts may feel blocked, and frustration with leadership or long-term goals can rise. This is a time to reassess ambition, redefine success, and examine whether drive is fueled by pressure or purpose. When Mars retrogrades in the 11th house, energy around friendships, groups, and future aspirations becomes strained. Conflicts within social circles may surface, revealing deeper issues around belonging and shared direction. This retrograde invites clarity about where effort is best invested collectively. In the 12th house, Mars retrograde operates beneath conscious awareness. Energy turns inward, motivation becomes subtle, and suppressed anger or exhaustion may surface through dreams or emotional fatigue. This is a deeply introspective period that favors rest, emotional processing, and quiet strength over external action. To conclude, Mars retrograde isn't something to fear. It's something to work with. When we resist it, frustration intensifies and energy turns against us. When we cooperate with it, strength becomes refined rather than forced. This cycle reminds us that power isn't measured by constant action, and progress doesn't always come from pushing harder. Sometimes the most meaningful transformation happens when we pause, reassess our direction, and reclaim energy that's been misused or depleted. Mars retrograde doesn't take your power away, it redefines it. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. New videos in this series are coming soon, so subscribing helps you stay up to date. Thanks for being here on Celestial Zodiac, and I'll see you in the next video.